Hi, my name is Nicholas C. Petris, former state senator from Alameda County, and I was very active along with my dear friend, the late Eugene McAteer, senator from San Francisco, in developing legislation which created the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission, commonly known as BCDC. And I think it's a great piece of legislation, one of the best I've ever worked on, which we were able to get passed thanks mostly to Senator McAteer. Came out of the Assembly in good shape, but had a lot of opposition in the Senate. But thanks to Senator McAteer, he overcame that opposition and we got the bill passed and signed by the governor. Now that bill is designed to correct the problem that had developed over the years in the terrible custom of indiscriminate filling of the bay by anybody and everybody. People wanted to dump stuff in the bay, dirt, garbage, all kinds of things, both from the shore and from the ships. And there were a group of people who were alarmed and shocked by that, who approached us. On my side of the bay, there were some wonderful ladies from Berkeley, including Mrs. Clark Kerr, the wife of the chancellor at that time, and Mrs. Gulick, who was the wife of an economics professor, and several other ladies who wanted to do something to stop the bay from being destroyed, because that's what was happening. There were studies that showed how much the bay had shrunk by virtue of the filling and other reasons, building on it and so forth. And predictions were that if something wasn't done in a very drastic way by passing some new law to protect the bay, we would eventually be walking across the bay from one side to the other. And so a group got together, and the ladies formed the Save the San Francisco Bay Association, a marvelous group composed mostly of ladies from Berkeley, associated with the university and otherwise, and developed the legislation to establish a commission to stop this indiscriminate filling of the bay. And it was passed. Maybe, I forget the number now, it doesn't matter. But it passed the Assembly first and then went to the Senate, where Senator McAteer really made some heroic efforts, because the developers were so alarmed. They thought this was going to be easy for them to defeat. And when it slipped out of the Senate, the Assembly, excuse me, and got over to the Senate, they really got alarmed. So they put all their troops and forces in there to do everything they could to kill that bill, which rather alarmed me, because there were some pretty powerful forces, including, well, builders, developers, even some of the labor unions who were close friends of mine at the time, and still are. But in the Senate, we had a great hero by the name of McAteer, Senator Gene McAteer, who represented San Francisco, and he came to the rescue. And the result was the creation of the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission. Now I stress that because people say, oh, you're a bunch of conservationists and environmentalists, and you don't care about business. The word "and development" was specifically included to show the intention. The intention was to protect the bay, to keep it clean, to stop destroying it by indiscriminate filling, but it wasn't intended to say no more development whatsoever. And there has been some development since, but it's been under controlled authority with a very careful monitoring of what kind of projects are approved, and with the intent of protecting the integrity of the bay. And I'm making this statement because I'm very proud to have been a part of that, a part of protecting one of the great national treasures in the whole United States, and that is our sparkling San Francisco Bay.
How about the intent of the anchor outs, offshore development, offshore boats?
Bay fill.
Bay fill. Where does fill come in?
Well, as far as I recall, It wasn't intended to stop the use of boats on the bay. That's what the bay is for. You have floating mechanisms that we call boats, and they're various kinds, all the way from the commercial barges to the pleasure craft of all kind. And there was no intention to say, well, you're not going to use these boats anymore. I understand that there are some people who want to stop the use of boats in some areas, but I think that's erroneous and it shouldn't be allowed.
You think that, how about fill or anchor outs fill? Or offshore boats considered fill as far as your intent is concerned?
No, I never recall that being regarded as fill. They're boats, they're mobile, they move about the water. They might anchor for a while, but they're not fill. They're part of the use of the bay by floating devices, which we call boats.
When you wrote the bill, how did you intend that the BCDC should interact with floating vessels? Did you feel that the BCDC should be an enforcement agency in that area?
Well, to the extent that it was determined whether they were actually floating vessels or not, there was always a skepticism about an awareness that you want to be certain that they really are boats and they're not anchored permanently and used for other things and never float on the water again. That was a concern at the time, but I don't think it was a declaration of war of anything that's on the water, which I understand some people are interpreting it that way now.
Well, residential use of the bay.
Yeah, that wasn't outlawed. There were a lot of homes, floating homes, I forget what they called them, but there were a lot in different parts of the bay. They were mostly in San Francisco, or rather Marin County side, but we had some over in the East Bay too. And there was no intention to get rid of them. There was some discussion, and some people wanted to, who came in and testified, wanted to limit those, but we rejected restricting, or eliminating rather, the use of those boats. They could have certain restrictions, but as long as they were floated and they moved about, we considered them to be legitimate uses of the bay. They weren't in contrast to what we were trying to do in the legislation.
When you say moved about, what does that mean? Did they have to navigate, or could they be moored in one spot?
Well, first of all, they had to float, which means they have to be able to move about. I don't recall any language that said you can't anchor in one place and stay there. That's what boats do. Little boats, big ocean liners, they anchor in one place and stay for a while. They're not moving all the time.
What is your definition of fill?
Well, we thought of fill in connection with things that were going on at the time. That's one of the problems we tried to solve, and that is that a lot of developers were just dumping huge amounts of dirt and boulders to extend the shore into the bay, and that's what we call fill. You put a boat on the bay, you're not filling it, you're using it for its intended purpose. But there were some developers who felt that the best way for them to do their work was to